Okay, thank you all for coming. We're going to start so we can maximize the time that we have. Let me begin by saying what a tremendous privilege it is, Mala, to have you with us this evening. Excuse a little bit of background noise. People just finding their seats here. We're doing this as a dual in shul event, as well as people joining from home. Mala is someone who I've had the privilege of knowing for a number of years, and also traveling to Poland with on several occasions. Mala, as you know, this is at least in my opinion, this is the best possible time of the year to hear your story. Towards the end of Tisha B'Av, we move towards a moment of hope, of comfort. We've just said in our davening the tefillah of Nachem, which means we daven for comfort, for hope, and I think your story above all is a one which does end on hope and a note of hope. So without further ado, Mala, I think we're going to allow you to tell your story. If you want to unmute yourself, and I'm also going to be sharing a screen so we can have some slides accompanying Mala as well. Okay.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yes.
And I'm waiting for the map.
Let me just do that now. Okay, we can see the map.
Okay, then I'll start. Hello, everybody. And I hope you're all fasting well. Now, this is a map of Poland as it was between the two world wars. Because you may not know that Poland was always having bits taken off and put back and taken off, always took more off than put back. And at one time, Poland didn't actually exist. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But this is how it was between the two wars. It's different now again. So I'll just explain that the top spot is Warsaw. The next one is Piotrków, Trybunalski, which is where I come from. The next one is Częstochowa, which is very significant in my story, but I'll tell you about it as I come to it in sequence. And I've put in Krakow because it is a beautiful city, and it is actually Auschwitz is located not far from there. So when people arrive at Krakow airport, on some occasions, they go directly to the site of this camp, then they go straight back to the airport. They don't see Krakow, and that's always a pity. But those that do will agree with me, those that have seen it, that it's a beautiful Polish city. And across here is Germany, and that's Berlin. And the next one is, I'll just go on, just a very old picture of my hometown, because my town is over 800 years old, which means it's older than America. So, but it didn't look like this in my time. It was much more modern. And the next one is really up to date, because I'm here with a group from Bushi Synagogue, and we're having a meeting in the square. I'm just sitting here on the wall, and all the participants there. So it's been really quite modernized, although the buildings are actually the same as you saw on the previous one. And the next one is the town hall as it was before the war, and it survived the bombing. And the next one is the park, which you can't see the best part of it. It was a beautiful park, and it has a special meaning for me because that's where I spent my early years with my siblings and friends. And when I visited, someone took a photograph, so I thought I'll show it. The next one is the hospital where I was born. It looks very grand for a hospital, but that's it. And the next one is my school, and I'll just stop very briefly to tell you it's been renamed the Janusz Korczak School. And I hope that most of you have heard of Janusz Korczak. He was a very special man. He was a pediatrician, but he was very interested in children, and not only their medical condition, but he was interested in children's rights. And he wrote a lot of books about it. He had a radio program. He was very well known and very much loved. So he's very well known for that. But what he's better known for is that during the war, he was in charge of the orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto. And when the ghetto was going to be liquidated, everybody was going to be deported to their deaths. He was told to stay behind, but he declined that offer, and he went with the children into the gas chambers. So ultimately, he gave his life for children. And this is what he's best known for. There are lots of statues of him, well, particularly in the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw with the children. And there's a lot written about him. If you get a chance to read anything, it'd be really worthwhile to get to know him, if only through a book. And the next one is the synagogue. Now, it's in a very dilapidated state here because it was not only bombed during the war, but it's been very neglected, was used as for horses, as stables, but it holds a very, very tragic story for me. And I'll tell you about it as I come to it in sequence. So I'll just leave that and tell you very quickly about my childhood in Piotrków. And people are always very keen to know about my childhood in Piotrków. People always say, well, tell us what it was like before the war. And quite frankly, my childhood was very happy. And I have really lovely memories of it. But it was really, in a way, a short childhood because war started. I was still 8 when the war started, and everything changed. And but I do have happy memories. And my town had 15,000 Jewish people in it. But we also have had an Jewish press, which meant that we had a newspaper, weekly, I don't know if it was weekly or daily. I wasn't really much aware of it then. And a lot of Sidurim were printed in our town, which are still around. And somebody actually showed me one in one of the shuls. I was one of 3 children. The middle one was an older brother, Ben, and a younger sister, Lucia. We had also 3 other sort of families, Jewish families. Our family, the Kleins, and one more Helfgott. So there were 2 Helfgott brothers and 2 Klein brothers living in, and that was really, in a way, the focus of my attention because I played with my cousins. But in just very few words, I had a very happy childhood, but unfortunately, on the 1st of September, 1939, bombing started and my whole world turned upside down. We were invaded very quickly because we weren't all that far from the German border. So they were in our town within 5 days. And they were right through Poland within 2 weeks because Poland wasn't prepared for that war. And we were actually the first ghetto to be, the first ghetto in the whole of Europe. So by the 1st of November, only 2 months into the war, we had already been forced out of our homes into ghetto walls. Now, ghetto is such a big story. There is so much to say. That's almost impossible to tell you all about it, but I can give you a glimpse. Now, I told you that we have 15,000 Jewish people in our town, but at its height, the ghetto had 28,000 in it, and you may wonder why. And of course, the 15,000 really didn't have enough room there because they gave us very little space. But when it filled to 28,000, and the reason was that the area around the border, which you saw on the map, the border with Germany, was immediately extended into Poland all the way around. And it became part of the German Reich, and it had to be what they called made Judenreich, free of Jews. So at its height, as I said, it had 28,000 people, and the overcrowding was such that there could be as many as 10 people to a room, or as many as 3 families to a room. We were very lucky. My father managed to get 1 room and the kitchenette for us. And I have to say, it was a very, very large room. So we were doing well. But at some point, an aunt came to join us at another, from another town. And well, the overcrowding was there, but in some sense, it was easing with the people that were dying because of the inadequate sanitary provisions. There were lots of epidemics, and a lot of people died from that. We lost about 4,000 from the epidemics. And we had a Jewish administration, which every ghetto had. And that's something that the German did, which again requires a whole evening to explain what it worked like. We had a president, and we had offices, and we had, you know, they were looking after all the different, it's quite like a sort of miniature town, very miniature. And, but of course, we were at mercy of the Germans. They gave orders and they had to be carried out. So in some ways, they were actually making the Jews do their dirty work. Because if they had, say, wanted to round up 100 people, in some cases, they didn't do it themselves. They would go to the administration and say, by tomorrow morning, we want 100 people, and we'll be here with the lorries at a certain time. And the Jewish policemen had to go around and do that job. And there was one particular man who was in charge of the ghetto. His name was William. I don't know whether that was his surname or his first name. And he used to turn up with a big, black, vicious dog. And that dog was actually trained to attack people, especially men, in a certain way that I won't even repeat. I can't repeat it. And of course, people were being shot, and people were being sort of disregarded in many ways. And mind you, on the whole, I must say that the atmosphere was quite sort of hopeful at the beginning, because we, like everybody else, thought that war won't last, it'll be over soon. But little did we know how long it would last, 5.5 years, and how it will end. What a terrible tragedy for the Jewish people. So I won't tell you much more about the ghetto, but food was short. People, we had empty soup kitchens, and there was quite a lot of sort of welfare work done by the Jews themselves to help other people. So we had soup kitchens, and people were helped, those that could help others who were worse off. But after about 2.5 years, rumors started circulating that the ghetto is going to be dissolved and everybody is going to be deported except people with jobs. And there were, a lot of people did have jobs, but they were mainly men of working age. Older people didn't stand a chance, and they certainly weren't interested in preserving children. So all those people, we were then, the ghetto held about 20, well, it was 28,000 to begin with, and then went down to 24,000. And at the deportation, they actually deported 22,000. But when these rumors started about the deportation, there was a lot of panic and people tried to save themselves. But there were various ways and means, but they were all very risky and very expensive. And the ways were to possibly smuggle oneself out of the ghetto and live outside in the forests or in the sewers and anywhere to avoid deportation. Some people knew people, had friends outside who would have saved one or two members of the family. And some people were actually saving Jews for money. And my father, together with my uncle Joseph Klein, my mother's brother, they were introduced to a man from Częstochowa, which I pointed out to you on the map. And I don't know if you noticed that, I didn't actually mention it, but that was very near the German border. So there's quite a lot of German people lived there. We called them Volksdeutsche. There were Germans living abroad as opposed to German living in Germany. And this man who was introduced them was a Volksdeutsche, and he was willing to look after, to try and save 2 Jewish girls. So I was going to be the one from our family to go, and my cousin, who was an only child, from my aunt Dora and uncle Joseph Klein. And arrangements were made. I won't go into details because there were a lot of details. They actually came to the ghetto, they were smuggled in, and to collect the money and to, make all the conditions. And they decided, the men decided, we didn't have much to say. I had nothing to say actually, but I'm talking about my parents. So he said that he'll come back in a week to collect, well, he collected his money, and he was coming back in a week to collect me, and a week later to collect my cousin Ija. And my aunt was very concerned because Ija was their only child. And she said, please take Ija first. She's all we've got, our only child. And he said, no, he'll come back for me. And my aunt was so concerned. He actually came with his sister-in-law. And my aunt told me afterwards, she gave his sister-in-law a little diamond ring. It wasn't a big diamond, it was just a little ring. And she just wanted to make sure that they will look after Ija. But, well, we didn't know how it was going to turn out. He said that he'll come back next week, collect me, and then collect Ija. And the journey was going to be quite perilous because they were always on the lookout for Jews. Because there was actually a reward for handing in Jews into the Gestapo. And some people made it into a very lucrative business. So traveling on a train on false papers, although we didn't look Jewish, we were scared. We were really scared. And, when you're frightened, it shows in your eyes. You just can't hide it. And so if anyone looked at us for more than a few seconds, we thought, well, they're suspecting us. But the journey went well. We got to our destination one at a time, and we found ourselves on the outskirts of Częstochowa in a house with a middle-aged couple. The man lived around the corner with his wife and child. He was their son-in-law. And we were supposed to be relatives who had come to stay for a little while from Warsaw. And if there was a knock on the door, sometimes it was okay for us to mix. Other times they'd quickly get us out of sight into a cupboard. But anyway, very quickly. And so we never knew where we were. We were just scared all the time. And I'll give you one example. On one occasion, when we were mixing with people, with visitors, one of them started a conversation with me and said, I understand that you are visiting from Warsaw. Where do you live in Warsaw? And by then I was so terrified that he's suspecting me of being Jewish that I had forgotten my false address. And but I had the presence of mind to make up an address. I just took a chance, and that was fine because he really wasn't suspecting me of anything. But this was our condition. The way we felt is that we were always being looked for, and we were really terrified. And my cousin was so unhappy that she asked to be taken back. And she was told she can't go back because the deportations are still happening. And she said that her parents have very good friends. She gave him the names. And these people are hiding her parents' valuables, and they'll take her in. And he said, okay, and off they went. And I was languishing there for what seemed like a lifetime. Eventually my time, lots happened between that time, but I won't go into that. And eventually my time came to go home. We were to meet in a flour mill in Piotrków. It was actually the flour mill where my father now worked, but it actually, before the war, it belonged to him in partnership with his brother and another man. Now he was lucky to have a job there. And we arrived at this rather large building and to the top floor, and there was my father waiting for me, but also my uncle, Joseph Klein. He looked at us and he went white with fear. He said, where's my daughter? And the man said, I took her back to Piotrków. I took her to your friends. He did say the name, which I don't repeat anymore. I used to, but I don't. He said, but she's not there. Where is she? What have you done with my child? And that's really the end of the story, because nobody knows till this day what happened to Ija. My uncle was arrested soon afterwards, together with a lot of other people, my father and my other uncles, and I think it was 38 people. Some were released. My father was one of them that was released. And the others were, after a little while in prison, they were taken to the Jewish cemetery, lined up against the wall, and they were all shot. So my aunt lost her husband and her child within a very short period, and she survived the war. And of course, she never got over losing her daughter, her only child. But, we didn't talk about it much, although she finally settled in Israel, and while I was living in London, and she used to go to America a lot because she had a brother there, but she would always stop in London. Sometimes she came especially, so we would always meet, but we couldn't bear to talk about Ija. It was too painful, and neither of us knew anything. But she knew a bit more than I did. So she told me that apparently this man did go to these friends. He collected a suitcase full of valuables, and he left with Ija and the suitcase. And my aunt said to me, how could anybody, well, she didn't know what to call it. We don't know how she died, how she was killed. I said, how could anybody kill a child for some goods? I would have given him everything I possessed, if only he had saved her. And the trouble that is that when one doesn't know what happened, one's imagination goes wild. It could have been the most horrific death. Don't know. But on another occasion, she said something to me which was absolutely heartbreaking. She said, my Ija had to walk into the gas chamber by herself. There was nobody to hold her hand. And that's the sort of pain she lived with for the rest of her life. Now, at that time, when I got back into the ghetto, it was now a small ghetto with just 2,400 people out of the 24,000. And all these people had a job. They were all working. There were just 2 factories, and they were turning them into sort of labor camps. So while they were preparing the barracks and everything, we still lived in the ghetto. And we got back, when I got back with the men from work, and that's a story in itself, but no time for it, I found my family intact. Because my brother had a work permit, my father, mother, and my sister Lucia had they stayed with 3 different families during the deportation. But it was very unusual to find a whole family because most of them had been just taken completely, all of them, and of some there were just the odd 1 or 2 members left. It was a very poor, very tragic sight. But while we were there, well, life went on for a little while, and they were still rounding people up, and they knew that people were returning from hiding, but they turned a blind eye. They had their agenda. So people were gradually, when they thought everybody was back, then they started rounding up the newcomers because they were illegal. They called them the illegals. So of course I was one of them. Well, all my family, no, my father and brother had jobs, but my mother and the 2 girls, Lucia and me, we had very little chance. We didn't know at the time what would happen. But in fact, when they thought everybody is back, they started rounding up all the illegals. And from what we called the small ghetto, we had a big ghetto, and then we had a small ghetto later. And they were getting us out of the ghetto. Well, I was one of the illegals, but also during that time, while we were still, well, they were rounding us up. On one day, they stormed into a room where my family was, just my mother, sister, and I. My brother and father were at work, and they were taking people away. They stormed into a room where I was with my mother and sister and a lot of other people. And they took us to that synagogue that you saw on before. And they were sort of rounding up people all the time, searching day in, day out. And each time they got a few people or more people. And they were kept in that synagogue without any food or water. On one occasion, they stormed into our room where we were with a lot of people. They took everybody away. But I was actually in bed. There was nothing wrong with me, but I happened to be in bed. It was somewhere to be. It was quite crowded. And my mother said that I wasn't well. And this Jewish policeman said, that's all right, she can stay. And my mother said to me, well, and they took everybody else away. And my mother said, just stay there, don't go anywhere. They took them to this synagogue. They were kept there, and every day they were adding more people. And they were kept there without any food or water or sanitary provisions. And they, later on, they were taken out and shot, and they suffered the most terrible death. But I'll tell you more about it because I've got the mitzvah, and I'll tell you a little more about it later. And so there we were. I was left with my father and brother. They had jobs, but during that time, they were still rounding more people up. And on one occasion, they rounded up my aunt, my health code aunt, and they, she was taken away screaming, who look after my child? And she had a 5-year-old daughter, and she was called Ija, actually, in Polish. And by then, I was the only female health code member of the family left. And it was down to me. I was 12 and was 5, and I looked after her. Then the ghetto was liquidated. Everybody was taken out of the ghetto that was going to be deported, the illegals, of which I was one, and as well. We were standing outside in a column outside the ghetto, and the lorries were arriving, and they were loading people onto the lorries. I was towards the back, and there's so much to say about the deportation itself, how it took place and what happened. But I'll just go to the point. We were two little girls, and we were very scared, and then people were moving on, and they were being taken away. And I looked sideways to my right, and I saw a German officer there who was obviously in charge. He wasn't doing anything, but just looking. He had plenty of helpers there. There were all the soldiers with their rifles at the ready. And there was quite a commotion. And I don't know what gave me the idea, but I stepped out of line. I went up to him and said that I've been separated from my father and brother. Can I go back inside the ghetto? They're inside the ghetto. And he looked absolutely flabbergasted and a little bit amused, I think, as well. But he actually called a Jewish policeman and said, take her back inside the ghetto. And I said, on the way, just a minute, I've got to get my cousin. And he said, you can't because she hasn't had permission. And I said, but I can't go back to him to ask. What do you expect me to do? I was imploring him, and I was sort of arguing with him. And actually, I want you to take this on board and really think about it as if it was you, because it's very difficult to imagine what it is when you're stuck in a dilemma. And there've been so many where the parents had to choose between the children. Say, well, you can take one, but you can't take them both, and things like that. And that was just one of the many terrible things that we have to cope with, apart from the physical, sort of the physical things we have suffered. The psychological things were sometimes even worse. So eventually I kept arguing with the Jewish policeman. Eventually he said, okay, take him quickly and get him to, go behind the gates. So that was a real bit of luck, because I'll show you later on in the PowerPoint what happened to these children. And we would have been with them if that German officer wouldn't have let me go back to my father in the ghetto.
He's sleeping.
So anyway, we were then the small ghetto was closed. It was liquidated, and we went. There were just two places of work: a glass works and a plywood manufacturing company. I was my father and brother went to the plywood one, and we were lucky to go there as well. But we were never a family anymore, because men and women were always housed separately in these places. And we used to see one another occasionally, not always. I started work at the age of 12 as a slave laborer. Of course, my cousin didn't work because she was still very small. And conditions got much worse. We lived in barracks, or we were two on just one bed, one layer, and we were there for quite a long time. Well, about 18 months, a little more than 18 months, when they decided to deport us, and they walked us to the railway station. Men separated from women. We didn't know where we were going, but I can tell you now that the men were deported to Buchenwald concentration camp, and the men and the women, with the women, went to Ravensbrück concentration. Now, I just described the arrival, and there isn't too much time. So the first thing they did was to take everything away from us that we brought, which wasn't much anyway, but it was all we had. Then we had to queue up and give our details, because, as you know, Germans were meticulous at record keeping. Then we had to we had to undress. Our clothing was taken away. Our heads were shaved. We went through cold communal showers. And when we came out at the other end, they gave us concentration camp garb, the striped jacket and skirt. And when we looked at one another, we could not recognize each other. It's very difficult to describe what it feels like when you've been stripped of your identity, and you just feel that you're not an individual anymore. We really were just like, I don't even have a word to describe what we look like, to make you realize what it was like. But it kind of diminishes you in such a way that you lose your you lose hope. You lose your will to live. And without hope, there's really no survival. And this showed itself very quickly, because my aunt Franja Klein she died soon after arrival. My best friend Pema Blachman died soon after that. And here I just want to point out to you that I'm telling these people's names as I talk about them. Well, they were my friends and relatives, but many, there's so many people that have disappeared that no one knows who they were and what their names were, because there isn't any family or neighbors, anybody to verify anything. And also we always talk about 6 million, and I So when I do have a name, I always use it because there were individuals with names, there were people. Because it's so difficult to comprehend 6 million. I can't imagine 6 million people. I mean, it's like nearly the whole population of Scotland. I think there's a 7.5, I'm not sure, but it's a lot of people. So in Ravensbrück, some people worked, I didn't. And I won't go on about Ravensbrück, and wherever we arrived, we thought, well, it can't get worse than that. And it just continued to get worse. And we thought, well, how long can this war last? Forever? And it's going constantly getting worse. And we weren't there very long when they deported us again. And this time, after a shorter journey, we ended up in Bergen-Belsen. Now, I'm sure you all know about Bergen-Belsen. It was liberated by the British. It's very well known here for that reason. So when we arrived, we got off the train, the wagons, the cattle trucks, and we could hear the Germans outside shouting, sort of the doors, the iron doors opening, and the Germans shouting "Raus, Raus," and their dogs barking, and we all got off. We had to jump from quite a height, and then we marched to the camp because the camp was some way away. I don't know exactly the distance. And when we arrived there, they were so overcrowded that they put us up in a tent outside the camp. But in the morning, they let us into the camp. And what awaited us there, I'll describe to you very briefly, just my first impression, because it's ingrained on my, on my psyche, in my eyes, in my heart. It's the most horrific scene. The first thing that struck you was the smog and the smell. And I can tell you why all this, but I won't go into detail. And there were people there, but there were skeletons, and they were shuffling along aimlessly. And as they were shuffling, they would collapse and die. So there were dead bodies everywhere. There were piles of bodies and piles of naked, twisted, decaying corpses. It was a horrific sight. The camp was very overcrowded. And a barracks that should have held 80 to 100 people would have hundreds of people. But I've read some of the reports, and this is from a medical journal, so I assume that it really is genuine. And one of the officers, the medical officers, described it as, there were 1,000 people in that particular barrack. It may have been a specific, quite a larger one, but the overcrowding was really horrific. But on the way, I heard that there was a children's home somewhere in the camp. Quickly set out to find it with Anne, and we were interviewed by 2 women, Dr. Bimko and Sister Luba. And if you read about Bergen-Belsen, you come across their names. They asked us a lot of questions, and one of them turned to me ultimately and said, well, we are also very overcrowded. But in any case, she said to me, you are too old. I was by then 14. So I said, okay, I understand. Will you take my cousin? But Anne wouldn't stay without me. She was so adamant, and she was so definite that she's not staying. And they could see she wasn't going to stay. And they took pity on, don't know, on her and on me. They took us in. That was really a bit of luck, because we wouldn't have survived in that camp. And even there, we actually went into barracks the children were Dutch children with an amazing story, which I don't have time to tell you. And even there, under minutely better conditions, I still contracted typhus. And I remember, because a camp was riddled with it, and people were just dying from typhus, like guys. And I remember lying on my bunk by the window in the upper bunk, and I must have come back into consciousness when I looked out and I saw people running. I had no idea why they were running or where they were running, but all I could think of was, how did they have the strength to run? Because typhus is such a debilitating condition that you really can't move. You don't have the energy to even move a muscle. And I remember when I eventually did, after being in hospital and everything, and when they came, actually I was there for another 2 days, and then they came for me with a stretcher, these two soldiers. It was liberated by the British, of course, and they were amazing. I mean, that's a story of its own that I don't have time to tell. But they came with a stretcher, and they were going to put me on it. And I said, no, it's all right. I'll get on it myself. Well, I got off the bunk, and I promptly collapsed. So they gathered me up, put me on it, and put me to the hospital. And that was as I told you, the 15th of April, 1949, when we were liberated by the British Army, actually. So I will stop here and just go back to the PowerPoint very briefly. How long have I got, Rabbi?
Well, we absolutely. I think maybe we show the other slides in the PowerPoint, and then we'll have sort of 5 minutes or so for some questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, but how long have I got?
We're aiming to finish about 9:30.
Oh, 9:30. Well, we're nearly there.
We're nearly there. You're doing fantastically, Mala. It's incredible. It's just it's a remarkable story. Everyone is, I'm sure, riveted. Should we show the slides?
It's really, I want you to see the rest of the PowerPoint. I want people to see the rest.
Let me do that. Let's do that. Okay, here we go.
And I was speaking as fast as I could, I assure you.
You did an absolutely fantastic job.
Well, yeah, well, I just go through the photos. So this is my father, and this is my mother, and this is the group photograph. And that's where I'm at the bottom here with folded arms. My brother above me, my aunt Franja, who died in Ravensbrück, my aunt Toras, she's holding Ija, my cousin, who disappeared without trace, and my uncle Marcus, and my mother and her sister. So the next one is just to show you we had bombing, but they were within. They got in so quickly, they didn't bomb a lot. And the next one is these announcements were on the left in English, in German, on the right in Polish, and they tell us where to report, and that's within 6 months of the war starting in March. In March 1940, we have to report with various valuables. They tell you what, it started with jewelry and money and those sort of things, but it ended up with everything. In fact, cold. We had cold winters in Poland, and I mean, any fur coats immediately they took, and so on. The next one is Ija with, she's with her aunt, actually. She's returning from school here. I can see she's got her satchel on. I can see the straps here. And the next one, my cousin Anne, and this was taken in Sweden. I don't know how long it takes for her to grow back. I assume this would take probably a year. We were sent to Sweden 3 months after liberation. because Sweden opened their gates for children and for survivors. So that's Anne. And Anne, who wouldn't leave me during the war, she was so attached to me. Once the war finished, she shed that fear, and she looks quite happy here, I have to say. So the next one is a list, and the next one is a bigger one, the same list, because I don't know if you can all see 151, number 159, Health got Mala. And I gave my age as 16. And why did I do that? Because I was only 14. And that is that if they were, wanting people for work, they wouldn't look at a 14-year-old. And if 16, I had a chance. But here I had Health got Tanya, that's Anne. And I gave her age as 10. She was 7. And I mean, what would I have gained? Because they wouldn't be interested in a 10-year-old. And she was 7, she looked about 5. But I am just wondering myself, why did I choose 10? But I think I don't know. I thought I did something for myself to try and save myself. I've got to do something for her. And this is Klein Franja. It's very illegible, but actually it's K-L-A-I-N, which is a Polish way of spelling Klein Franja, and that's my aunt who died in Ravensbrück. And
Mala, where was this list from?
Sorry?
Where was the list from? The list was from when you
My friend found it online on the computer. It's the list from the people going to Ravensbrück.
Ah, okay.
Actually, it's got a title, but I can't see it on here because I've got bits of, But the title says the last Jewish women deported from Piotrków to Ravensbrück. It's at the top. It may be on the first list. This is another version of. Anyway, we can just go through the maps. This is the long journey I'm showing you from Piotrków to Ravensbrück. This is the shorter one to Bergen-Belsen. And there were all these camps. There are 8 camps in Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was set in a forest. It's a beautiful area around there with lots of lovely trees. And that's where the camp was. But it was divided by barbed wire. But there were 8 camps within that camp, some men, some women. So this is just a look at the camp, and you can move that on to the next one and the next one. And that's the children's barracks. So I'll just leave the number, you could read there, 211. And this is Kramer being arrested by the British soldiers. And before he was commandant of, before he was commandant of Bergen-Belsen, he was commandant of Auschwitz. So he had very good training there. And the next one is the camp going up in smoke, because unlike other camps, they didn't want to preserve any of it. It was so contaminated. And the next one is the first Bergen-Belsen, the first memorial going up in Bergen-Belsen. The camp only started in 45, but so many people died there in that time. And the next one is the restored synagogue. It's it became a library, and it's got a plaque on it saying that it was a synagogue before the war. And I visited Piotrków a few times, and they actually have provision there for davening. If people visiting, Jewish people visiting who live there, or even if they didn't live there, and they want to have a service, that they've got space there and all the necessary things, and including a small Torah. So this is, they've now built a big library, and it's a documentation center. This is my brother Ben Helfgott, and he is one of the Windermere children. And there's been quite a lot of publicity because there's a film and it was shown very recently and it's been shown many times. So he came to England in October. And what he really became famous for, apart from being an untiring sort of worker for, promoting the learning of this terrible subject, the Holocaust, he has represented Great Britain at the Olympics. So this is what he's well known for, and he's been decorated by the Queen for that. And the next one is my husband. I put him in because I feel he's helped to win the war. He was called up in February 1942, and he came and he served for 5.5 years with the Royal Engineers. Now, he was in the middle of studying. He was an architectural student, and he had to stop that and catch up. And he always used to say, I came to England at the same time as Mala. And I thought, well, he's just saying it because he wants to identify with me so much that he even came to England when I did. But in actual fact, I mean, he was in the army. He was born here. His mother was born here. But after he died, and I was going through our papers, I found that he did arrive in, by ship as the troops did, on the same date as I arrived here at another place in England. So it was really true. He would say to me, "What, didn't you believe me?" If he had a chance, unfortunately, he died. Now, can you just go to the next size, next one? Because you can actually read it for yourself, because you can see it as well as I can. In everlasting memory, 560 innocent Jews were murdered here by the Nazis on December 20th, 1942. And when I tell it to schools and non-Jewish organizations, I always point out 20th of December, because these same people who carried out these terrible murders, I didn't tell you how my mother died. Well, I did say that they were killed, but I didn't describe some of the details, not the killing details. I couldn't do that. But how they took them out in groups of 50 at dawn and walked to this forest called Rakov, and there they were murdered in the most horrific way. And we knew what happened because people came to tell us, witnesses came to tell us. And I always point out because I mostly speak to non-Jewish people, and well, Christian, Muslim, whatever the schools have. And I always say, on the 20th, they carried out this terrible atrocity. And then 4 days later, they were back with their families, celebrating Christmas Eve. And what does it take to do that? And here it says, in sacred memory, 39 Jewish children were murdered here by the Nazis in July of 1943. Now, these were the children that were with me, with their mothers being deported. Now, they said to the mothers, you give us your children, because you're going to be deported to labor camps and you won't be able to have your children with you. But we're going to build a children's home and they'll be fine. And this is where they ended up. And I actually have a booklet which describes their death and what they did. And it just doesn't bear thinking about. And the next one is, well, you can just carry on from there. I did get a degree. I worked in I missed all my schooling practically. I was 3 years and war broke out. So the next one is, I don't know what else I've got there.
Oh, I think that's the last one, I think.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think it's I think it's such a remarkable story. I'm sure people have lots of questions. Unfortunately, we run out of time for questions, but that's it's not a problem because anyone who wants to ask questions, I'm sure I can forward to Mala by email, right, Mala? I can forward you any questions by email. I'm sure you'd be happy to take them and answer. Is that right?
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully they want me to win it. It's because I'm quite sort of fully engaged, mostly on Holocaust. So I usually don't commit myself to do questions, but
No
because
problem.
sometimes someone asks me something, it's such a big and complicated story, and you can't say it in a few words. So what happened when you arrived there? Well, I'll answer whatever I can as quickly as I can, but I don't promise to. Really.
No, it's fine. I won't. I don't want to. We'll fill them out and only maybe send the best ones. But Mala, let me just thank you very much, really, on behalf of everyone here, because it's been absolutely incredible to hear your story. You're an amazing inspiration in so many ways, and especially because the story that we've heard this evening, we know that story you tell to so many, you've now told to thousands and thousands of children across this country, which has made a difference and will make a difference to their future lives in so many ways. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone else for joining as well.
You're welcome.
It's just a terrible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Amazing.
Thank you so much, Mala. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're all welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really, really excellent.
I'll leave then. And
yeah, thank you so much. Sorry we didn't have time for questions, but it was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's a shame, but it's I can't. I'm speaking as fast as I could, and
I can't delay. I can't delay people after towards the end of the fast.
Well, I mean, 5.5 years in an hour.
Yeah, absolutely.
I packed a lot into it.
You did a fantastic job. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You're very welcome. So I'll leave. Thank you. All the best.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.